Hello, I've got for you today something slightly ambitious, most notably because if I can't get through this in one take, I'm not going to post it, basically. So one of the things that I find interesting with the world of fountain pens and the videos on their use is how much joy people derive from watching somebody use a pen to do beautiful calligraphy. It's sort of a nice spectator sport, but it doesn't really appeal to me. I make these videos because I want to share with you the experience of these pens and sort of what you can expect to get out of them in terms of their actual physical characteristics, right? I'm not sharing with you really the writing experience because that's very difficult to communicate via a visual medium. So that's pretty much why I don't like doing writing samples, because it's not like you have the pen in your hand, you have no idea how much pressure I'm putting on the paper, you don't really know the friction of the paper. There are a lot of variables that don't come through the video. So today I'm going to try providing a bit more information about the pens, about the Montblanc pens that I have, and like most quasi-scientific things, we're going to come to a conclusion that's quite obvious. Basically what I want to do is I want to try to get you to understand the amount of pressure that an individual nib, a Montblanc nib, might need to produce line variation. So to do that, I want to start with something that you guys all have, a generic ballpoint pen and some generic office paper. So what I plan to do is I plan to show you how much pressure a standard ballpoint pen takes to produce line variation. And if you do this as well, you can get an idea of how much pressure you are putting down on your sheets of paper, so that when I show you actual values, you have an idea of sort of what pressure actually looks like and what it means to you in your hands. So here we've got the paper on a scale, and if I apply very little pressure, the ballpoint pen doesn't really register. Right? It doesn't produce a line, so very little pressure, you don't get much of a line. So you get a line about 50 to 60 grams of pressure, 80 grams, and then the second line at about 100 grams of pressure, give or take, and then shorter line, let's try to get 150 grams of pressure, and then let's max out the scale at about 200 grams of pressure. So you produce obviously quite different lines. Now if you do that, you produce 3-4 lines with as little pressure as possible, but a medium amount of pressure, and then with quite a bit more pressure, you will see that line variation. And if you turn your page over, you'll notice, that those lines translate in very obvious deformation of the paper. So the shortest line produced, we applied 200 grams, about 200 grams of pressure. The next line about 150. This line about 100 grams, and this last faintest line, the minimum amount of pressure that we needed to apply to get a visible line. That's what 50 grams, 20 some grams, right? And so if you turn your page over, you'll get an idea of sort of 50 grams. You produce quite a little bit of page deformation, and if you push quite a lot of pressure, 200 grams, you get quite a lot of page deformation. So that shows up quite clearly on the way the paper. That's why we've stacked 4 sheets of paper to give you a consistent backing for the lines to be able to deform the paper. Now, so that's given you hopefully a bit of an idea of how much pressure you may apply in your own handwriting. So maybe, you know, try to write something and turn the page over and see how far your page has deformed. Compare that to the 4 lines that I did, and you get an idea of sort of what pressure you're applying to the page. Now, I've done that with a selection of my Montblanc pens, and you take a few measurements, and you end up with a graph, basically. Let's see if I can share that with you. So here's what I mean about being a foregone conclusion. The calligraphy pen, the first one, produces the most line variation. So the x-axis is the grams, y-axis is the width of the tines. I've got a friend who works in microfluidics, and I asked him, okay, how do I make measurements at small scales? I don't have microscopes, I don't have really the proper equipment to do this, but with magnification, zoom, and increasing the size of the image, you can take that increase into account and work with the output, the video. So that's how we got these results. So, not really surprising, the calligraphy pen with the biggest nib, and with, of course, the intention of flexing, produces that nice large flex up to 800 micrometers. You're applying about 200 grams. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the Bespoke and the Classique, which have very little flex. So you can really put quite a lot of pressure on these really small nibs without getting much line variation. And I think you'll probably damage the sheet before you successfully produce very, very thick lines. And I was surprised, actually, the Bespoke pen that I have, Bespoke 146, also has relatively little line variation based on the pressure. So if we separate those graphs individually, the calligraphy pen definitely stands out as being as having a completely different profile from the rest of the pens. And also the Bespoke and the Classique have relatively little line variation. So there you have it. Whether you find that useful or not, I don't know. I've always been curious about how we can more effectively communicate the experience of using pens to viewers. It's nice to share a video about the calligraphy, but really you don't get a sense of how much pressure you're putting on the page, and how much it actually takes to get that beautiful line variation. So hopefully this small experiment gives you a bit more information about what these nibs are actually like to use in the hand. Of course, some people may say that it's completely irrelevant how these pens write. These are really decorative pens, but I think the calligraphy pen is something you're gonna want to use. The Classique is also pretty common, and the 146 pretty common as well. So there you have it. Make of that what you will. Hope you enjoyed it, and let me know if you've got any questions.